Okay, so the second part of this lecture was common mistakes in research writing. And I know we've been discussing these common mistakes, but I want to go into more detail. And I know a lot of you will know these rules already. So if this feels like just repetition from things you learned a long time ago, I understand that. But these are the things, the problems that we see as editors the most often. So if you can fix some of these issues, it will be very helpful for your writing. So I want to basically impress upon you why good writing is almost as important as the science. Because if your writing is not good, you won't get published, and readers won't be able to understand your work. And then I want to review these issues, and then assess them in a research paper. And finally, we'll do an editing workshop, which is really just us looking at examples and seeing how to fix them. Okay, so I wanted to give you this quote because I think it's very apropos. There is no form of prose more difficult to understand and more tedious to read than the average scientific paper. I think you can all agree with that, that scientific papers that are not good or not well written are really boring and hard to understand. And Dr. Crick, Francis Crick, was the creator of the DNA helix, double helix model, so he knows something about science. So writing issues are prevalent in so many manuscripts, such a high percentage. In the introduction, in the materials and methods, and then general problems too. 81% of manuscripts in this study from, I believe it was a North African study, had problems. So significant issues in writing. And that's okay as long as we can fix them and work to make them better. That's what we want to do. So this would be an example of the kind of editing work that we do. You might submit your paper and it looks like this, and then you get it back and it looks something like this with changes made to transitions and specific vocabulary and not only words but also phrases for natural expression. And there's also a lot of comments that I didn't include, but there's a lot of comments off to the side explaining the reason for some of these changes. So your editor should be explaining to you as an author so that you understand why, and you can improve in the future. I don't want to go through here. Let's just say poor writing has a negative impact on the study and on your potential to be accepted into journals. So your work might not be accepted if your writing is not good. In reviewing these, I want to talk about a little more detail. So we have wordiness again, irrelevant, redundant information, vocabulary, unnatural phrasing and order, and then grammar and style has its own category now because I want to go into some specific punctuation and grammar issues and style issues. Okay, so this will be a pre-test before we get into our English language and grammar 101. I want you to see if you can tell me what is the writing issue with this, what's the problem, and what are your suggestions. So, however, only a little bit of research has been done on residual stress on the surface of titanium alloy grinding. So I've underlined the problem areas. So what do you think are the writing issues here, if you look at this chart? Okay, vocabulary? Yeah, this is colloquial, good. Only a little bit of research. Yeah, little research, right? Little research has been done. Or few, well, research is not countable, so we wouldn't say few. But there's other words we could use to make it shorter as well, right? Okay, good. And on residual stress on the surface of? The issue with this is it's wordy and we also have too many prepositions on residual stress on the surface of. It's not academic, it's wordy. So we could say minimal, okay? There's a word you could use. And guess what language that's from? It's Latin, right? Or little. And then decrease these prepositions. So, however, minimal research has been done on residual surface stress. So instead of using, the top of the building, you could say the building's roof or the building roof. So a lot of times using of can make it too long as well. And here, residual surface stress of titanium alloy grinding. It's just another way to use adjectives to shorten this. Okay. Anyway, by the way, Unequivocal experimental evidence for source-tracked interactions has, for birds, been not fully expressed. Who could tell me any issues that are going on with this? Yeah. Transitions is, by the way, it's a great Pyeongijang, but it's a good convenience store, right? But it's not a good transition for an academic paper. How about this? Has for birds not been fully presented? Yeah, syntax. So transitions, good, and awkward phrasing. We could say at any rate, moreover, you don't always have to use the most scientific Latin terms in every situation. I mean, sometimes at any rate it could be acceptable, but by the way is just not acceptable. Moreover, and then change the word order. Okay? Has not been fully presented. Effect estimates of model are based on prospective studies and therefore subject to confounding factors impacting a study. What's the issue? We're missing a little part of English, a little element of writing. Yeah, we're missing articles, right? Maybe the effect estimates of the model is what I would say. So incorrect determiners, we call those determiners. An article is a kind of determiner. So incorrect determiners and articles are the biggest thing that we edit, actually, because to be frank with you, as a native English speaker, I think that they're ridiculous. A and the are very difficult to understand how to use correctly. So I want to give you a tool today for that as well. So add the and check all your articles. The effect estimates of the model impacting the study. The categories of the more specific categories of writing issues. In the first category of grammar, punctuation, and mechanics, we have determiner misuse, common punctuation mistakes, subject-verb disagreement, and verb tense issues. The reason I'm putting these into categories is because as editor, I've spent many years, studying my language and reading hundreds and thousands of papers and correcting them. So I can categorize these fairly simply once I check. But I think when you edit your own work, it's helpful to have these categories in front of you so you know what you're looking for. You can ask yourself the question, did I add all of my articles? Or are there any subject-verb disagreement issues? It can make you become a better writer by acknowledging the kind of mistakes that you can make. Okay, style issues, wordiness. That includes nominalization, which we'll discuss. Don't worry, that's a huge word, I know. Prepositions and repetition. Lack of flow. That means just not clear, flowing writing. Vague, colloquial, or non-academic terms. And then finally, structural issues. We won't deal with structure much. That is basically on you. You and your advisor and an editor that's going to understand the details of your area of study. But language editors are not going to be able to fix these issues for you. So you need to be very aware not to include irrelevant information or to put your content in the wrong place or to make unclear connections, because ultimately that work is not going to be fixed by anybody except for you. So let's start with determiner misuse. So a determiner is any word that that determines the kind of reference a noun group has. Okay, we're getting too technical in our grammar here, right? So that includes articles. Cancer is a major cause of death in the US. The results of the study are quite significant. Why are we using A and the here specifically? I'll show you a chart that might be a good tool to use. Demonstratives, this, that, these, those, and which. And quantifiers, few, a few, many, much, every, some, most. So these are some of the determiners that a lot of authors make mistakes on. So let's look at this chart here. And again, you might know all of this or a lot of this. And if so, then please bear with us. If not, then great. So these are uncountable nouns. So an uncountable noun is a noun that you cannot count, right? Such as water. That's always the first one, right? Sand, pizza. Well, you can count pizzas too. So you can choose. First, ask yourself, are you referring to any of the uncountable noun? Then, use the noun with no articles. So any of these nouns that you're referring to. For example, drinking water has many benefits. Which water? Any kind of water. Love is a strong emotion. So no articles. You don't say the love. It's just love. Or money. Money is good. Love is good. One specific uncountable noun, if you're referring to one particular noun, use the. Okay? So the water in this lake is clean. So you're referring to something that you may have referred to before, or you may be referring to in this moment. But it's, yeah. Specific, yeah. And you don't necessarily need in this lake right here. If I already talked about the water in the lake, then I don't have to have this prepositional phrase to include the. We know which water I'm talking about because I referenced it before. We examined the water bordering the town. Which water? The water bordering the town. Okay? So a simple chart. And as far as countable nouns, choose which member of that countable noun, or if you're referring to one member, use a or an. So I want any one of these. I want a car. I don't want that car. I want a car, any car. A virus could have infected this specimen. So we don't know which virus. We haven't referenced the specific virus, so a virus, any virus. If you're referring to all of the members of the noun in general, then use the noun with no articles. And pluralize. Colors can affect our emotions. Scientists have been researching this issue for decades. Okay, so you can pluralize the noun. And then finally, if the noun is a whole group, use the, or sometimes plural. The elephant is a large mammal. We could also say elephants are large mammals, right? The harp is a difficult instrument to learn. Harps are difficult instruments to learn. So mostly people forget the article because it's just so small, and when you're writing, you don't necessarily need to. You can make those mistakes. So that's why when you edit, you don't have to make it right the first time. You can always go back, and that's why editing is important, because you're reading and revising your work. Okay, so which articles should you use here? A, an, the, or no article? Don't look at your paper. How about number one? We analyzed a variety. It's sort of an idiom too, but any variety. We analyzed a variety of tissues. Okay, experts identified lake surrounding the compound. Yeah, unless there's multiple lakes surrounding the compound, which would be very strange shaped lakes, I suppose, as the source of infections in question, right? The infections. Because specifically they're the ones that we're wondering about. Colors affect our perception of reality. Yeah. No article. Colors, all colors. Unless we're talking about specific colors, those colors. Okay, so demonstratives have the similar rules, but I want to talk to you about how they can be used incorrectly or correctly in research articles. So use this or these to refer to items that you referred to or that are within the study. These studies support the germ theory. This finding has great implications. The aim of this study, so instead of using that, don't use that. In real life, we can point to that, right? And I'm not sure in Korean if this is true when you say the kugol. If you say kugol in the study, I'm not sure if that rule applies, but you say igol, right? This thing that's in this paper that I'm talking about. You don't say that theory is common to most social psychologists. Say this theory is common. And as for those, I like those because it's what we call a substantive or a nominative, I believe. Dig deep for my grammar. A nominal. So those can be substitute for a noun. Can substitute for people or the subject. So for example, those exposed to radiation were at risk for thyroid tumors. You don't have to say those people who were exposed. You can just use it as a noun. Those exposed, if you add a participle or add an adjective. Those left in the 30-degree water shrunk more rapidly. But just like we need to know what the subject is first, right? So we already mentioned the subject. We already mentioned that we're talking about gummy bears. I don't know. So those gummy bears left in the 30-degree water. Those left in the 30-degree water. You can just use this as a noun. Next, qualifiers. Qualifiers in the introduction sections show importance and discuss the literature in general, right? Many most, some. As a scientist, you should be careful not to use words like all or every. And use these correctly, right? Because many means, I mean, I've been asked by Koreans before, asked me like, okay, often means like once a week or 3 times a week, right? But usually means like 4 times a week. But there's no exact meaning like that, right? Same with many. But most, obviously most means more than 50%. So you have to be careful when you're using that in a scientific way. But every, you don't want to say every because there's always exceptions. How about the vast majority of? We know it's a majority. We know it's 70% or more. The vast majority of is a good exception, a good expression. You should know the difference between the meaning of few and a few. What's the difference? Yeah. You want to explain? Okay. I have a few friends. Okay. Is it a positive or negative statement if you say, I have a few friends? A few without a. Right. I think that's the best way to break it down is saying few is usually negative or it's disconfirming. You're saying that it's not a positive thing for your research. If you say few studies support this, it means not enough, right? Insufficient, not very many. But if you say a few, it usually means not zero, not none. So, for example, few relevant studies support this theory. This means this study has almost no support. But on the other hand, if you say a few relevant studies support this theory, you're kind of connoting that this study has some support. It doesn't have no support. So you could say most people don't believe that aliens built the pyramids, but a few people believe it. It's not no people, right? Okay? Okay, which demonstrative or qualifiers should you use? Few, most, these, or those? How about number 1? Results have several implications for this field. It's hard to, there's no context, but these fits best, right? These results, not those results, most results. These results have several implications. How about 2? Since studies come to the same conclusion, further research must be conducted for a few or few? Oh yeah, we don't have a few as an option. So few, yeah, few studies agree with this. So we need more research. Okay, interested in becoming scientists. Those, probably people, right? Those people, unless we're meaning like animals. Okay, polar bears are not native to most continents. Okay, let's move on to punctuation errors, commas. I think commas are the trickiest. I'm a managing editor, so I have the misfortune of seeing editors make comma mistakes from time to time, and it drives me crazy. But it's tricky. But I want to show you some big ways that you should avoid when using a comma, some big errors. So the comma splice is the first one. The general rule is do not use a comma to divide 2 sentences without a conjunction. So instead of, protesters showed up on the streets, comma, some were shouting and carrying large posters. How can we fix this? 2 simple ways we could fix this. You can separate the independent clauses with a period, or a colon, or a semicolon, or a conjunction. I would not use a colon here because it doesn't make sense. But the rest could be used. So protesters showed up on the streets, semicolon. Some were shouting and carrying large posters. The semicolon is not used very frequently by amateur writers, and I think it's very undervalued. The semicolon is like a period, but it connects 2 ideas that are similar but on the same level, right? Whereas the colon, you're listing something after the colon. A colon's like the first sentence is important and the second sentence is either like you're revealing something or it's less important. Okay, so combining lengthy sentences. Do not use commas to separate compound sentences or sentences with other commas. It's abstract, so let's see what that looks like. Incorrect. Some useful subjects are English, which is an international language, comma, math, comma, which is used in all domains of sciences, comma, and philosophy, comma, which underpins many other areas of study. How do we fix this? I see this all the time in writing. It's very easy to fix. I suggest that you write this one down. Use a semicolon whenever you use commas in your list, in between the list. So you see there's English is 1. Some subjects are English, 1, and then you're explaining English. And then you have another comma before math. So it's really confusing. So some useful subjects are English, which is an international language, semicolon. 2, math, okay? It's much easier to read that way, and the semicolons are doing the work for you. Okay, capitalizing after the colon. You do not need to capitalize the word unless it's a sentence or a proper noun. So instead of I have 3 desires to eat, sleep, and work. Unless you have I like to sleep, eat, and work, you shouldn't capitalize the T. Okay? Here's another incorrect use. Only use the colon to list items when the second clause illustrates, explains, or expands on the first. So you wouldn't say, Sarah and her friends love spending time on the mountain, colon. Nature always held a special meaning for them. What would you use instead? Period? Period might be good here. Yeah, period's good. Good old period. But I would say, you know, be bold. Use a semicolon sometimes. You don't want to use it all the time. But here, these 2 sentences are quite part of the same experience, and they're on the same level. You're not showing something totally new, and there's no difference in importance. So use the semicolon. And also don't overuse colons. There's some papers I see where people love to use colons all the time. Instead, try to use an em dash. I don't remember if I've discussed that here, but instead of a colon, use a dash, right? A dash like this. This dash here. That can be useful instead of a colon. Okay, starting a sentence with a numeral. Basically, don't start sentences with numerals. 45 students participated in the survey. No, just write out the word. 45 students participated. If your word is very long, 4,553 students, then don't start it with the numeral. You can change the sentence because you don't want to write out long numeral too. Capitalizing common words. Do not capitalize common nouns. I see this all the time too, and it's actually really frustrating as an editor because I'm not sure if your word is the proper noun. Is it the name of the scientific? Is it the name of a keyword or a project or what? So I don't know if I can't change it all the time. So be careful and only capitalized nouns that are proper. This research project, so this is not proper, was supported by Seoul Metropolitan Government. This is an official organization, official body. It's going to be capitalized. Okay, check your spelling. That's the one I wanted to say. After editing, I recommend using Grammarly, to be perfectly honest. If you don't have Grammarly, as an editor, I shouldn't tell you that, but Grammarly is really good at catching a lot of errors that you might miss. Okay, subject-verb agreement. So a subject and its verb must agree in number. There's some tricky ways that tricky sentences people miss, such as when it's the middle of the sentence, a phrase or clause. So this is incorrect. The causes of this disease is bad diet and lack of exercise. What should we change this to? Are. And do you see why the writer might be confused? Because they might see, oh, this term coming right before the verb is singular. Yeah, and the subject is causes. Yeah, the causes of the disease. This is a pretty simple one, but it can get trickier. Compound subject. A scientist and a doctor works in this office. Work. Why do you use work? There's 2 people, but that's only true if you use a conjunction such as and, a coordinating conjunction. The study's findings presents several implications. Present. Why? Because here, findings is the subject. Yeah, the study's findings is plural, present. Okay? The following pronouns take a singular verb form. I would say these just memorize. We can't go through and do examples, but each receives a 500 milligram, this should be dose. Needs to be edited as well. Something always inhibits these results. Everybody is welcome. Nothing has been determined. The following pronouns take the plural verb form. I got called out at Korea University a while ago, so see if you can catch any mistake here. Again, this is usually true, but if you're going to make me explain the grammar, then I'll try. Both are qualified to do this job. Many in the control group failed to react positively. I know why. Because I used past tense here, and I apologize for that. So many in the control group fail to react, if we want to use present. Few people answer our survey. I use past tense, right? So it's hard to tell the plural versus singular. Several even retain their original colors. So basically, don't look at the examples so much as the rule. These are singular, these are plural. Okay, most. All right, inconsistency in tenses. Sometimes you can have the correct verb tense, but then in the same sentence or the next sentence, the author will use a different tense. And that is not right. So you want to be consistent. So here we have, the man walked into the store and picked through the tomatoes. How can we fix this? Well, you have to just choose one or the other, right? The man walked into the store and picked through the tomatoes, or the man walks into the store and picks through the tomatoes. So be consistent with your tenses. This also applies to a linking verb or a verb like felt or thought or something like that. So if you say, when I was 12, or want, let's say want. When I was 12, I wanted a horse for my birthday. Or you just have to make sure that even in the past tense, or could, how about could, a verb like could. So he always thought when he was young that he could fly, right? We're not saying he always thought that he can fly, even though he might think it today, even if it's true today. Okay, so here's another example in a research setting. Bacteria assemble flagella as propellers, but rotation and assembly consumed up to 3% of bacterium's energy. That's a pretty real-world example. You want to separate these into different sentences if you want to use different tenses. Bacteria assemble flagella as propellers, but rotation and assembly oh, actually, I messed up this one too. Consume. I think this is the one she called me out on. Rotation and assembly consume up to 3% of a bacterium's energy. Or you can change both to past tense. I don't want to go into all of these because, as I mentioned, so many examples. But let's see if we can test ourselves on these. Which grammar or punctuation issue is present in this sentence? I should give these to you as an editing task. Which grammar or punctuation issue is present? The aim of this study is to determine whether a single forecasting model exists that can predict fashion consumer trends. Determiner, so a, the, and the, punctuation, subject-verb disagreement, or verb tense issues. It's very small. Here's a hint. Is model countable or uncountable? Yes. It's just this, right? Because here model is, we're referring to any model. Does any model exist? So one way you could check whether you use a, the, or no article is to use, see if you can substitute this or that or any. So if you can say this or that, then you'd use the. If you can say any, then you should use a, right? So the aim of this study is to determine whether any model exists, whether a model exists. Okay, choose the sentence which uses the determiner most appropriately. Studies indicate recent rise in student debt. We put those samples in basket A. This figure represents the most current situation, or the purpose of the research is to get results. Why do you think D? There's a major flaw in D, major problem, which is very common, by the way. If you make this mistake yourself, D is not correct because research is never pluraled. Research is never pluralized. Studies indicate recent rise in student debt. Well, rise is countable. So we usually say a recent rise. We put those samples in basket A. Well, we don't use those when writing. So C, by process of elimination. This figure represents the most current situation. Difficult, right? Luckily, if you make these kind of little mistakes, someone who can edit can fix them quite easily, but it takes a lot of looking at the examples and tool. Okay, I want to go through here quick because I do want to practice the editing exercise with you. But excess words and phrases can be fixed by a couple methods. But I want to show you the difference in fixing your excess words and phrases by getting rid of junk verbs. So here, this paragraph is quite wordy, 56 words. This expresses the same thing. It has 9 fewer words, 47 words. How did we fix this? Let's look at it. Give a presentation of, we've changed to present. From our attempts at forecasting, okay, that's similar. Variety of, we have various. There is no single model. No single model exists. So not only is it less wordy, but we have stronger verb in some cases. There is no A. A는 없어요. A doesn't exist is a little bit stronger. So let's look at how we do that. So we can fix that using fixing nominalizations, this is a nominalization. We have give a presentation of, so pointless verb plus a verb that's been changed into a noun. So instead, we just use the original verb, present. And guess what language that comes from? It's Latin. Too many prepositional phrases can make your writing harder to read, and then repetitive language as well. So let's start with nominalizations. And I think these are quite fun, to be honest, because we use them all the time and we don't know it. So we have a meaningless verb plus a strong verb that's been changed into a noun. So we delete the meaningless verb and we use the strong noun. Instead of Joe will conduct research, we say Joe will research. And it can be okay to use conduct research sometimes, but if you make it a habit to delete this kind of expression, then you can make stronger verbs. On the board, we'll make a decision. We use that all the time, right? Well, decide is better than make a decision. You only have one verb, and it's a stronger verb. When the nominalization is the subject of a passive voice, identify the subject and change it to a verb. The approval of the plan was given by the committee yesterday. The committee approved the plan. So much better. So much easier to read, right? Their interpretation of the implementation of this institute's program was insightful. How about you use an adverb? They insightfully interpreted how the institute implemented its program. And the reason you can tell there's a problem with the first one is it gives you a headache, right? 머리 아파요. 머리 아프죠? 이거 읽으면. It hurts your head to read this. Their interpretation of the implementation of the institute's program. You lose track of what's the subject. In this one, first was their introduction of their analysis of dreams by the trauma patients. First, they introduced how they analyzed the trauma patients' dreams. Let's see if we can do these together. We should take into consideration several factors. What's the stronger verb here? Yeah, consideration is a nominalization. So get rid of take into and just we should consider. How about this? The analysis of how X factor impacts B gene expression was conducted. Okay, good. You can make a new subject. I like we. We is okay. Or yeah, we analyzed X factor's impact on gene expression. So much easier to read when you get rid of the of here too, and the passive voice. Okay, getting rid of prepositions. Sometimes you can use a possessive instead of. So the approval of the FDA was received yesterday. The FDA's approval was received. You don't want to do that all the time because sometimes making it possessive in this way, using apostrophe, is not appropriate. You can also use the active voice, right? The approval of the plan was given by the committee. The committee approved the plan. You can choose adverb substitutes. Most researchers have approved this issue with hesitation. Most researchers have approached this issue hesitantly. Or you can use WH, or who, what, when, where, why, how clauses. The purpose of this study was to examine the effects of solar radiation on bioluminescence. The study examined how solar radiation affects bioluminescence. I think this last one is quite useful and something that you might overlook, but it can be really useful to make a long, long sentence a little bit shorter and more straightforward. Okay, eliminating repetition. There's a lot of tools here. Let's see which will work best for us. So use diverse and precise verbs. So, this is something I see a lot, right? First I will address, next I will address, finally I will address. So using the same verb is the problem, but also the same structure. You're using the same sentence structure. Subject, verb, object, subject, verb, subject, predicate. It becomes very boring. So first, change your verbs to be more precise. First, I will address the protocol. Next, I will analyze. Finally, I will assess. And also, you can, if you're using the same noun, then use a pronoun. The V8 engine is an 8-cylinder engine. The V8 engine cylinders are mounted here. Most V8 engine banks, you can use its, right? It's. As long as it's clear, don't repeat the subject again and again and again. Over long sentences, you'll notice here that there's end. What can we do with these kind of sentences? We can put periods on them, and then we can add transitions. So break up the sentences by subject. Make sure you're not connecting subject A, subject B, subject C, because you can do that. You can make a sentence that is extremely long, but you don't want to kill your reader. So instead, break it up. Our social infrastructure will continue to change with the effects of low birth rates and higher life expectancy in the near future. Okay, that's one statement. Then you have a transition. Therefore, maintaining economic growth, social services, and traditional infrastructure will grow more difficult. Comma, which is one reason the Internet of Things and robots are expected to become a critical alternative. The way you structure this, just with basic punctuation and in order, so you have the main argument and then therefore, and the transition word tells the reader a lot. Just how it's structured is really helpful in understanding your point, your argument. I think we can skip these. Please read them, view them later. I've added so much text so that it's easier to understand on your own. Okay, I wanted to go into basics about non-academic terms and expressions. So not using informal or colloquial language, using more objective and precise adjectives. So instead of the discs were quite large and heavy, be more precise and say the discs weighed around 43 kilograms on average and were composed of slate black rubber. So as you are scientists, you want to be descriptive, even when you describe your methods, especially when you describe your methods, right? When you're describing what you're doing with materials. When you're describing your materials, you're not going to just say it was white and ugly or it was big and heavy. You want to give more precise adjectives. And then finally, use verbs of Latin origin that are one word in length. Okay, good. So if you have a phrasal verb, these are phrasal verbs, which means a verb with a preposition. So look closely at, or think about, talk about. Instead, examine. Look closely at, examine, analyze, think about, consider, talk about, discuss. And there's a whole bunch of them, right? You can Google and find these kind of lists too. So I hope that you can use these as a resource. We actually have these on our website. We have a whole article that has 100 plus verbs. that you can substitute. So all of these add up, calculate, find out, discover. Almost all of these are Latin, except for safeguard against. Okay? And I don't want to say Latin is superior to the Old English or German, but it's definitely used in science, right? It's the language of science. Okay, so let's see if we can do one more quiz, and then we'll look at the worksheet that we have. What is the best way to improve this passage? This study analyzes the EVA protocol for urban communities. The EVA protocol can be used to assess issues of health and other needs. Health and social problems are ameliorated by annual funding to the EVA. Can we add a transition at the beginning? Can we use more academic terms? Are there places for that? Can we change unnatural phrases to increase readability? Or can we combine sentences to reduce repetition? Yeah, the first thing I notice is just the repetition, right? How can we do that? I think the first thing we could do is combine the first two sentences, and add a relative pronoun or preposition, a which, right? So this study analyzes the EVA protocol for urban communities, which can be used to assess issues of health, social issues, and other needs, ameliorated by annual EVA funding. It's much shorter. I have mentioned the rules about verb tense, but there are some other general rules that you can apply. So use the past tense when referring to prior research in general. But again, the caveat, when you're in APA and AMA, you usually will apply this. But if you're using some other formatting styles, the rule could be different, right? So if you're referring to literature in MLA, I'm not sure if any of you use MLA, but you always use present tense. When you're referring to general facts, use present. When you're referring to the subject of your paper, use present. And again, I know I don't want to say something to contradict myself, but our study demonstrates you're talking about what your study is doing now. You're saying, we conducted this research, then you're talking about the action that you took in the study. I'll let you see these examples on your own as well. And again, finally, we have misplaced content. I'll let you look at these on your own as a reference, because it's important not to put the wrong section content in the wrong section. Okay? And if nothing else, I hope that what we've learned today shows you that there's a lot to learn for everybody. Even native editors or native authors who have been doing this for a long time still need to keep a lot of these things in mind. Okay, so let's move on to the writing and editing workshop. So if you can take a look at your worksheet, this will be similar to what we've done in the quiz, but I want you to actually take out your pencil or pen and practice making these changes yourself. So I've broken these down into 3 scopes of an editing paper: the phrase sentence level, the paragraph level, and then the section. And I don't want to look at the section or the whole paper. I want to look at the phrase and the paragraph. And the paragraph level means like unifying, making sure that you have a topic sentence and that the following sentences flow from that. But most of these examples are going to be on the sentence level. So let's proceed with that. But when you're editing the work, which I said you can do it later, you don't have to do while you're writing, while you're drafting. You can write one section and go back. You can write half of a section and go back and edit. But you shouldn't have to constantly be thinking about these issues when you're writing. But when you go back and edit, you should ask yourself these questions. Is the content relevant? Is the paragraph unified? Does each paragraph make sense internally? Are there supporting details? Is the language academic? Am I using enough Latin verbs? Are there grammar issues? Are there sentences that are hard to read, that are just longer than I thought when I wrote it? Maybe read it out loud. When you're reading your work, try to read it out loud and see what it sounds like, or read it to someone else. Do you use transitions effectively? And do you repeat the same information too much? Could you delete it or expand upon certain information? And I want to move to this one, which I believe is the first paragraph. I don't have the worksheet in front of me, but as you can see, I gave you this first section. This is the original version, and then this is my edit of this. So I just want to show you what you can do to edit this work. So let's just go first to the introduction section, this here. And I want to give you about 1.5 minutes or 2 minutes and see how you can edit this one. And if you can, try to write down any writing issues you can find, and any phrases you need to rewrite, you can write them here. And you can cross out the words and write in new words, whatever you need to do to edit in this, such as this paragraph. So yeah, how about just 1 or 2 minutes and try to edit this first 3 sentences. Okay, so if you're not finished, that's okay. Let's see, what do you think are some ways to change this? What kind of writing issues did you find in this first passage? Punctuation issues. Okay? Grammar issues? Any specifically? What kind of grammar issues?
Yeah, with lots of people.
Okay, with lots of people, big amounts of data, so subject-verb agreements. Let's take a look. I think right at the beginning, you have a more colloquial term. So instead of writing nowadays, that's colloquial, right? And we don't really need to mention that, right? We can just say online crowdsourcing has become one of the widely used methods to conduct behavioral experiments with large numbers of participants. This is one way to elevate your language. People is not wrong. In comparison to traditional methods of performing offline experiments, crowdsourcing on the internet can collect a significant amount of data, requiring less effort to recruit participants, etc. Okay, so if this looks anything like yours, I think when we send the PDF, we can include this workshop information as well. And if you would like, I can include the edited samples because we're not going to get to all of them today. Okay, how about this one? I've highlighted the problems here, so I'll give you 1 minute to check out number 2. Okay. What do you think? How about the beginning? It was revealed in our results that disability status residential disadvantages. How can we change that? Good, make it active. Okay, our results revealed that disability status. How about a finding? Yeah, a finding consistent. We don't even need which is, but finding that is consistent. Finding consistent, which we didn't discuss that issue. Okay, then in the rental market, and our paper clearly raises more questions than raises answers. What can we do here? I would add a period, yes. How about this? Clearly raises more questions than raises answers. Then answers, yeah, we don't need to repeat raises. And therefore, yeah, in this, right here, we do not need this comma. Serves as a point of departure to build on the current limited existing literature. How many modifiers do we need? We don't need that many adjectives, right? So we could just say current literature, or existing literature, or current limited literature. On a residential attainment. Well, attainment is not countable. It's just the idea, like information or research. So on no article. Okay, here's my edit. Our results reveal that residential disadvantages due to disability status were more prevalent. Okay, delete which is, and then period. Our paper clearly raises more questions than answers, and therefore, no commas. Yes, and delete these modifiers. Okay, you got most of it. So let's look at the next one. Let's look at number 1. It's a bit shorter. Weidenbach, 2005, suggests that knowledge organization influences course success in a specific programming task. Is there anything wrong with that sentence? I think it's okay. These are actual samples. I've modified them a little bit, but I think this one's okay, but could we make it better? What should be first? Okay. Weidenbach suggested that knowledge. Yeah, if we're, depending on the formatting, we might use past tense. How about this one? Intrinsic factors such as gender, comma, style preference, comma, learning style, comma, and self-efficacy relate directly to the characteristics of the learner and have also been studied. I think this we could, I think we can move it, right? Intrinsic factors, other intrinsic factors have been studied, such as gender, style preference, etc., right? So we don't want to move this verb too far away from what we're talking about. Or we could use parentheses or em-dashes. So let's see how we edited this one. Okay, well, it's quite a bit different than we thought, right? Weidenbach suggests that knowledge organization influences the course success in a specific programming. Oh, I think I made a mistake. I know what I did. I showed you the wrong one. So you guys were looking at different ones than I was, right? Not the original, but the simple markup. So we don't want to look at simple markup. Okay, so we have all kinds of issues. Subject-verb agreement, repetition, determiners, and then the lengthy passive voice here. Okay, number 4. Let's look at number 4. So the writing issues I came up with, just as a preview, were, I won't preview them for you. Okay, number 4. Just check them for 30 seconds or 1 minute and see what you think. Okay, let's just go kind of phrase by phrase, because I think that's the best way to edit too, is to see if there's any local, spelling issues or grammar issues that need to be fixed. And then when you read the whole sentence, you can see the context and see if there's a way to make the sentence better. So what do you think of this first phrase, first sentence? But in October 2009, how can we make this even better? Generally, I think however would be better. However, comma, in October 2009, an audit said that the goals of the Heart Smart eHealth project. How about said? Is there a better term we could use? Mentioned? Reported? The goals of the Heart Smart eHealth project were too bold and needed a delay of 2 years at the least. A delay of 2년 이상? At least 2 years. Okay, then moving on. And while the government's funding for the project has been used up by more than half, yeah, we could say although the government, or yeah, although the government has used up more than half of the funding, comma, the project is less than 30% complete. So there's a few ways to mark this up, right? There's no exact way. You can see I'm looking at it, even though I've edited it and saying, I might do this differently than I did a few weeks ago. But here's how I did it. However, in October 2009, comma, an audit concluded, concluded, and here I believe concluded makes more sense, that the goals of Heart Smart project were too ambitious. So instead of bold, I'd say ambitious is a better term. And required a delay of at least 2 years. Needed a delay, required a delay. Now you could do half of these edits and it would still be acceptable, but we're talking about raising the level, the academic level as well. So that's why I've made some of these vocabulary changes. Additionally, while the government's funding, we don't need for the project, right? Maybe that's obvious. So that's just wordy. While the government's funding has been used up by more than half, the project is less than 30% complete. So we know from the context that we're talking about the project. Okay, I know it's freezing in here and it's getting late. I want to do one more. That's all. And then you can ask me questions. And if you have questions you don't want to raise your hand about, you could ask me directly as well. But first, let's do one more short one. Which one looks interesting? Okay, the short one looks interesting. Go figure. Okay, number 3. And remember, editing is not like a test where you try to read through everything to comprehend it. Sometimes the fixes can be right there in the first phrase or the first sentence. So if you see issues right away, you can make those changes. Can I give a hint? I think if I remember how I edited this, I tried to combine these into one sentence. I could be wrong, but that's one way that I would approach it now. Okay, let's take a look. How about this first sentence? The study borrows a qualitative case study approach of Kressner and Poth. Any issue? Yeah, there's no context, but I might say this study. Let's say this is in the introduction. The first sentence, let's say this is the first sentence, or first part of the literature review. This study borrows a qualitative case study approach. How about of Kressner and Poth? How can we make that, get rid of the of? How about if it's their specific case study approach, you could say, this study borrows Creswell and Poth, 2017, apostrophe S, right? Kressner and Poth's qualitative case study approach. Okay, now I guess we're seeing my markup here. Okay, here's my edit. The study borrows a qualitative case study approach from Creswell and Poth. Okay, they're borrowing it from these two people. That's how I chose to edit it. Relevant documents on IWUA in the study area are examined, comma, including research papers, organizational documents, such as projects, program reports, and the nation's strategic plans. Because this is such a long parenthetical, it's better to put it in parentheses here, comma, and public documents. Then you don't have this verb at the very end. This is one thing I see a lot in research papers that I edit, is the verb is like 2 sentences down or 2 lines down, and I forget what it's, what it's doing, what's the in-between that it's examining.
There is a connector and, so is there necessary comma?
The comma is, well, that's an Oxford comma, right? So it's actually not totally necessary. You mean the comma before end? Here?
Yeah.
So are you asking if we need that comma? It's not essential. You don't need it. But sometimes it depends on what you think about the list. But that's one of those commas that's, the rule is, there's no standard rule. So the Oxford comma, right? When you make a list. So American journals tend to use it. In British language, not as much. But I don't know if there's any exact rule on that Oxford comma. Just be consistent when it comes to comma usage. If you make a list with A, comma, B, comma, and C, do that consistently, right? Because if you don't apply it consistently, then it's just not consistent. Okay, I want to thank you very much for sitting in the cold for 3 hours with me. And I hope this has been helpful. We're going to give you the materials through the faculty and the PDF, and we're going to be making a video too. So if you missed anything, you want to go back and check it out, please do so. So before Q&A, I want to say thank you very much.